When people ask me about my exchange year in Japan, I have a really hard time giving them the full picture of all that happened. I mean, I lived in a country thousands of kilometers away from home with people that I didn't even know, in a country of which the language I could barely speak. And I had nothing that gave me any sense of security. It is easy to think of exchanges as this really amazing experience that makes you grow personally and you can face challenges that you couldn't in your home country. And that is absolutely true. But at the same time, I experienced really low lows in Japan. I had to face struggles that I didn't even know were possible up until that point. And it is that negative side that I want to share a little bit, because I feel like for the longest time I couldn't even begin to process what it was like, which is also one of the reasons why after I came back from Japan, I didn't really want to have anything to do with it anymore. I was not interested in the language anymore. I kind of let go of a lot of my friends because they just reminded me of all the pain that I had experienced during that time. Just in case you don't know me, I went to Japan as an undergrad exchange student from fall 2019 to summer 2020, and I lived with a host family, which I'm gonna come to back in a bit because that is a really crucial part to this whole story. The university that I chose to go to, I chose specifically because I knew that they had a homestay program, so I knew that there was a potential for me to live with a Japanese host family, and it had always been my dream to go abroad and live with a host family somewhere. I also thought that living with a Japanese host family might give me a new view of Japan, a deeper insight into the culture and the norms. It was also really important for me to get good at Japanese. At the time, it was so important for me to study really well and learn whatever I could. So I thought that being surrounded by native speakers whenever I'm at home would be the ideal scenario for me to learn a lot of Japanese, especially Japanese that you aren't exactly taught in class. Lastly, I also thought it would just be nice to, have someone to come home to, someone that you kind of already know, someone that you can talk to about your problems. So when I could finally go to Japan after all the interviewing process and the application process, I finally landed and I was so excited to start this new journey. I woke up to reality pretty quickly though, because it turns out living in a country that you've never been to before, where you don't know anyone, is not that easy after all. The first few weeks I barely have any memories, to be honest, but I remember sleeping a lot because I was just so exhausted from speaking Japanese and English all day long. All I remember is that our classes would keep getting mixed up. We would keep meeting new people that we then wouldn't see again the next days, which made it really hard to find real friends. The few people that I did get along with really well, that I saw more than once, kind of betrayed me after a few weeks. They went out on multiple occasions without telling me, even though I had asked them to go out with me, which might sound like a minor thing, but you gotta remember I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any friends. And I also didn't have Wi-Fi at home at the time, which made it really hard to connect to anyone really. I felt like I was cut off from the world. And that betrayal by my friends were almost the last drop in the bucket. What finally made me burst was the fact that my host family was sitting there having their dinner, and I would usually be in my room to do my homework or to take a nap. And when I went downstairs later that night, everyone just stared at me like I was some foreign alien. And I was like, why did nobody tell me that we're having dinner? I would have liked to have eaten with you. And it was just so awkward, and I sat down, and at that moment, everything just came gushing out. I just started bawling my eyes out, and my host mom was so confused about what happened. And I told her about what had happened at school, that I was unable to find any friends, that nobody wanted to go out with me, the fact that I hadn't had Wi-Fi in 6 weeks, and I couldn't talk to my parents or to my friends back in Germany. I also told her that I didn't really like that they would just eat without me because it had happened a few times before. So I told them that I thought, it would be nice if we could all have dinner together. My host mom then gave me a bit of a pep talk. She told me that, it always takes some time to meet people that you get along with, to find friends, and she'll make sure to call me down for dinner. After that, everything calmed down a little. Finally, we had our home classes, so I would finally be with people for more than just a few days, and I actually managed to make friends. I thought that, okay, the first few weeks were pretty rough, but this is where the actual adventure starts. This is where I'm gonna have fun in Japan. But I was very wrong. Everything was fine for a while, but a few weeks later, my host family started with their weird behavior again. And, I had friends at school that I would hang out with after school, so I was fine on that front. But coming home just always felt very awkward. I didn't really feel welcome into the family when it was dinner time or even at the weekends. I felt like I was kind of being ignored when I just, I sat there and I tried talking to them about whatever went on in my life or asking them questions about their life, trying to really get to know them. But they made it really hard for me. Sometimes they would just kind of talk about what they're gonna do on the weekend and they would totally exclude me from that conversation. And, I understand that as a host family, you're not obligated to take your host student to places and pay for all their stuff. But I didn't even expect that. It was as if I hadn't been there and they were just making plans for their Sunday afternoon golf club, which I feel like is extremely rude to just do right in front of someone and not invite them. They would also start doing this really weird thing where they would go out for lunch or for dinner and they wouldn't tell me about it. So I'd be in my room doing my homework, or I'd be at school coming back home from school and all I see is there's a plate on the table. I felt like I was more being treated as some kind of animal that, they just kept for, I don't know exactly what reason. But when they just put that food on the table and went wherever without telling me what is going on, it felt very bad. I tried to remain as unbothered as I could because, I could just spend more time at school, hang out more with my school friends, and kind of ignore the awkward atmosphere that was at home all the time. Then came the Christmas break and the spring break, though, which are very close to each other. There's only 1 week of school between those two, which is really awkward. But as you can imagine, a lot of my friends went to travel around Asia. They went back to their home countries to see their family again. And at the same time, COVID also hit, which meant that a lot of students were actually asked to go back home. So at an instant, I basically had no friends to hang out with at school because, we're not at school during break. A lot of my friends are out and about doing stuff by themselves with their families or whatever. And the other half of the students is just back in their home countries. Meanwhile, I was stuck at home with my host family, and while I try to go on trips, obviously it gets expensive if you go out and about and try to travel every single day. So I spend a lot of the time during that time at home. What I would usually do is I would go to class in the morning, or rather to school in the morning to study at the library because I wanted to get placed in a higher level class for the next semester. So I studied really hard. And sometimes if my friends were available, we would go somewhere. If they weren't, I would just go back home or I'd go around the neighborhood and just see what there is to see. Now, I thought that was almost fine except for the fact that there was still this really awkward atmosphere at home. But one day my host mom just approaches me with this very strange conversation. Basically, she sat me down and she asked why I'm not enjoying my time in Japan. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm enjoying myself? And she's like, well, you don't really seem to be going out a lot and you're never at clubs. You never come home drunk. You don't even come home late. You never meet up with any guys. So what are you doing? She also mentioned something along the lines of that I'm always going to really boring places and that, I should go to more exciting places, to more picturesque places and, meet with my friends and take a lot of pictures. And I didn't even know what to say to that. I'm not the kind of person to go out to clubs and get really drunk and just hook up with random guys just because I can. Now, I understand that that might be some people's version of fun, but it is not mine. I was also very happy with the places that I went to. I am not the kind of person that, I only go to places because they are nice for Instagram pictures. And I think that that was what she considered to be an important part of an exchange. Now, don't get me wrong, I went to amazing places, but they weren't like super famous. It was more like really small cafes, really small gardens that I really enjoyed my time there. For some reason, it was really hard for her to understand that that could possibly be fun, and she kind of implied that I was wasting my time in Japan. Now, remember, I also said that it was really important for me to learn Japanese. I wasn't in Japan to have fun 24/7. I was very focused on my studies and getting good grades, even in Japan. But for some reason, she didn't really seem to understand that that was possibly fun and why I would have come to Japan. And I felt really judged. It felt bad knowing that, every time I go home and tell my host family about the fun things that I genuinely thought were fun, they would look at me with these weird faces like, you think that's fun? Was it expensive though? No? Oh, gross. And for a while I felt very insecure about the places that I went to, so I kind of wouldn't tell anyone, or I wouldn't be very explicit about what kind of place it is. But after a while I just realized that, if I want to go to a place and my host mom wants to judge me for it, and my friends don't want to come with me, then that is their problem. I can have a lot of fun by myself, and that is something I really had to learn, and it took me a while. This is not something that went in like 2 weeks, but it took me a while to realize that I can in fact enjoy my own company. I can in fact do things that I think are fun, even if others think they're not fun. I can in fact do things even when others judge me for them. And that was, once I realized that thought, that was so freeing. Because then I could go to places without my friends. I could go to places without my host mom judging me for it, and I didn't care. And I had a blast doing that. So then a few weeks later, my host mom approached me again, and she was really curious about my love life for some reason. She's asking me if I have a boyfriend and if I want to get married soon and all of that. And then she started this story of herself that I don't think I will ever forget. That was the craziest thing that I've ever heard someone say out loud. Like, how some things you think to yourself, but you're like, I would never tell that to anyone? That is that kind of thing. Why would you tell that to anyone? She told me that when she was younger, when she was in her early 20s, she was looking for a boyfriend. And she didn't want just any boyfriend, she wanted a rich boyfriend. So what she would do is she would go like cheerleading or something, bring water to baseball players, to really famous baseball players after the games, after the matches. She would basically bring them water and a towel, some snacks or whatever. And she told me how that way she would meet many young men that were very wealthy, because baseball in Japan is pretty big, and that she would consider getting married to. She then told me that she met her current husband, my host dad, that way as well, but she wasn't sure whether she wanted to marry him or not, because, he was kind of like not super rich, but kind of rich, not super famous, but a little famous. So she was hoping that if she went on cheerleading a bit longer, that she could find someone who's even more famous and even richer. But, she said, she was worried that if she waits for much longer, she would be too old for anyone to consider her a good wife. So eventually she decided that she would just get married to my host dad rather than waiting for someone else to come along. She finished that whole story by saying that she still wishes that she had waited a bit longer and found someone with more money. And I was so confused when she said that. I didn't even know how to process what she just told me. Because I feel like those are things that you don't just tell your exchange student, especially after the atmosphere has been so weird for so long. It's not like me and her were close friends or anything. She barely knew anything about me. And yet she comes at me with her whole love life story about how she doesn't actually like her husband, and it was pretty apparent. And I think that was the moment for me when it finally clicked. When I finally understood that she is just the type of person that pays a lot of attention to her outward appearance, that is very focused on keeping up a good status, that she cares a lot about money and expensive materials and luxurious goods. I don't think that there is anything wrong with that type of thinking, with being focused on these kinds of things in life, but it is just really hard for me to relate to that. And then suddenly it made sense why she thought that I was wasting my time in Japan. You know, I wasn't looking for rich future husbands. I wasn't going out to get drunk and party. I wasn't going to clubs and like have expensive drinks and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't going out to really fancy museums and tourist places that I could brag about to my friends. And then finally it made sense why it was so hard for me to relate to her and for her to relate to me. Our values are just on two opposite ends of the spectrum. And that, I think, is the second really important thing that I learned about the world, basically. The fact that there are people that have so deeply different values than I do. Because up until that point, you know, I thought everyone was kind of thinking similarly to me, and I wouldn't even spend a second thought thinking that, you know, others might actually care about other things. But that is when I realized, okay, people do actually have very different values. People value very different things, and it is actually going to be really hard for us to understand each other, to understand where we're coming from and where we're trying to get at. With that in mind, I then understood, or I think at least that I understood, why my host family treated me the way they did and why they would never invite me out. Because I wasn't like all dressed up. I don't wear makeup every day. I don't have fancy jewelry. I don't have a fancy expensive bag to show off. And, you know, when they go out to restaurants in the evening, maybe they don't want their kind of normally dressed exchange student that doesn't exactly care about these really overpriced meals to drag them along. The following few months, I just spent a lot of time at home because COVID and we couldn't go to school. A lot of my friends had gone home, which again led me into the spiral of, you know, not really feeling wanted, not really feeling accepted, feeling very, very lonely as well. I was getting to a point where I was just kind of over it. It was very mixed. I was very happy and very sad at the same time to leave Japan and leave my host family. The day that I left, both my older host sister as well as my dad had left to go get coffee with some friends or something, which I thought was a bit rude because, I mean, I had just spent a year living with those people and they didn't even bother saying goodbye. My host mom did say goodbye though, and her final question to me was whether I enjoyed my stay, to which I just said yes because I didn't want to, get into all of it. The truth was that I did not really enjoy my stay there. There were good times, no doubt. Sometimes we'd laugh together at the dinner table, but for the most part, I would say that my host family was one of the factors that made it really hard to live in Japan and made it really hard to enjoy Japan and my whole exchange experience. And I don't think that that is necessarily because they're evil people. I don't think they did that on purpose to, harm their poor exchange student. I think it was more a lot of unawareness of what exchange students and foreigners, for that matter, actually go through when coming to a new country. And just the difference in values. being so far apart in what we want from life. And when I say we, I mean especially my host mom and me. We seem to be wanting completely different things from life, which made it really hard for us to relate to each other. It has now been almost 3 years, and I think I am finally at a point where these things don't affect me negatively anymore. I don't know if it is classifiable as trauma, but for the longest time I was really struggling to process what even happened to me and how to sort all these thoughts and feelings and emotions in my head. Nevertheless, I'm really glad I got to experience living in, another country, in another family, and to just see what that's like. I still think that despite all the bad things that happened in my host family, I still learned so much Japanese. I learned so much about the culture that I could have never learned had I not lived in a host family. Now, whether that price was worth it to pay, I cannot tell. I already paid the price, and I will never know what my experience in Japan would have been like had I not gone to a host family. But I don't want to ramble on any longer. If you have any questions or you'd like me to talk about something else, feel free to leave a comment down below. And I appreciate that you watched this whole video, if you did, up until this point. I'm also curious if anyone else went to Japan or maybe is currently in Japan and what that experience is like. Because I do feel that a lot of people go through very similar things. And there is no shame in that. That is perfectly fine. But yeah, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.